Hey, soldiers, there's something out there that's more terrifying than a recession, scarier than inflation. This phenomenon does not treat assets in the way we've come to rely on. So, with inflation, our assets tend to inflate right along with everything else, giving us more, value in that asset. As far as a recession is concerned, you can usually rely on assets to see you through that, especially if they're kicking off income. But with this phenomenon that we're going to talk about, hyperinflation, all bets are off. Are we going into a hyperinflationary environment? First of all, what is hyperinflation? Well, the definition is kind of vague. And if you're looking for a specific percentage of inflation to call hyperinflation, you're not going to find it. Hyperinflation is subjective. So we may be starting to experience it right now. We're going to talk about hyperinflation, what it is, what it could do to our economy. Give you a little history lesson real quick. And I'm out here hiking in the Patapsco Valley State Park, trying to make sure the number one asset stays, in good health. World War I. Of course, we know Germany lost that war. And they were responsible for war reparations that they had to pay to other countries like France. Well, they couldn't afford to do it. And what happened was they just started to print up, I think it was Deutschmarks at the time, might have been Reichsmarks. In any event, they started to print up their fiat currency, just print, in order to satisfy these war reparations. Well, of course, that resulted in, at first, inflation and then hyperinflation. That's where the old story about having a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks, that's what was needed in order to buy a loaf of bread. That's hyperinflation, where no matter how many of these fiat notes you bring to the table, it still is going to make even the least little thing super expensive. Now, we're already experiencing inflation. I just came from the grocery store. And inflation in food is up. We just did the video about that. But let's get into how some other assets perform with regard to hyperinflation. Is there anywhere to run? Is there anywhere to hide from hyperinflation? All right, guys, look, I'm going to finish this hike, and then we're going to get into it. Okay, so with the example of the Weimar Republic, we see that an increase in the money supply is one ingredient of hyperinflation. The other is increased demand. Now, of course, there's a lot of demand out there because there are more dollars available. So that is really, driving demand. However, the inability to keep up with that demand is what pushes those prices up. It's the old law of supply and demand, right? So if you've got, a whole bunch of dollars out there in search of fewer products, those products are going to rise in terms of their price. And if we look at the producer price index, we see that costs are being driven up for these manufacturers. So it's costing them more to produce, to put items on the shelf that we are going to ultimately purchase. In fact, in August, the producer price index was up 0.7%, almost a full percentage point. And if you look at this chart, you see that overall, the consumer price index is elevated. Now, one of the drivers behind this is gasoline, fuel. We know that OPEC cut production. We know that as far as the United States of America, we have almost exhausted our supply in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We refuse to exploit our own natural resources here in this country. So again, we see demand without the requisite supply to satisfy it. All right, let's transition this and talk about what you may want to consider doing to prepare for a hyperinflationary environment. Will this happen tomorrow? No. Do we have the ingredients to have it happen? We do indeed. However, our economy is so large that while it might take a country like Venezuela, okay, mere months to realize a hyperinflationary environment, or Zimbabwe, mere months to get into that kind of trouble. It takes us years. Our economy is so much larger than those that I just mentioned. Now, also, Argentina, they're currently going through a hyperinflationary environment. In fact, the annual rate of inflation in Argentina is expected to average 147% in 2023. And we don't even know if their government is, being very conservative with that number, because we know here in America, we don't get the accurate inflation numbers reported. We have to do a little digging because food and energy are not included in some of the inflation metrics. And that skews that entire calculation for us. Food and energy, you're purchasing that every single day. They're saying, they being the Fed and the Treasury, oh, it's too volatile, we can't include that. Yet we are still exposed to it. So Argentina at 147%. And you might say, well, Tyrone, how can we hide from it? What about gold? Well, it's interesting because we did see gold hold up very, very well in the inflationary period of the Weimar Republic. Over the 5-year period of what was termed the hyperinflationary environment of the Weimar Republic, the gold price increased 1.8 times faster than the inflation rate. In other words, not only did someone holding gold survive during the Weimar inflation, their purchasing power actually increased by nearly double. All right, but that was approaching 80 years ago. How has gold been behaving in these hyperinflationary environments since then? Not so well if we take a look at gold's experience throughout the Venezuelan era of hyperinflation. Gold's performance in Venezuelan bolivar terms comes as a shock to those who blithely assume that the yellow metal is a good hedge against hyperinflation. This isn't to say gold hasn't put up a valiant effort. It has risen 10,700% in bolivar denominated terms since the end of August. Of course, the bolivar is the currency note, the fiat currency note for Venezuela. But it still hasn't come close, gold that is, to keeping up with the hyperinflation. According to Claude Herb, a former commodities and fixed income manager at TCW Group, the real price of gold in Venezuela, in Venezuelan currency terms, has fallen more than 60% over the same period of time. He says we shouldn't be surprised by gold falling short. In a study Herb co-wrote several years ago and circulated by the National Bureau of Economic Research, gold turned out to be a poor hedge against this type of hyperinflation. All right, so you might say, well, look, hey, Tyrone, what about real estate? Can we hide from hyperinflation in real estate? Well, looking at Venezuela once again, middle-class citizens of that country tried to protect their savings with residential real estate. Their year-to-year value dropped dramatically in 2017, leaving them helpless against hyperinflation. So that's what I was talking about. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, but there is something you can do. You got to get in front of this, and you got to prepare for it. How do you do that? Well, these people are having trouble paying for their rents down there. So you pay off real estate before we get into that type of environment, okay? Because remember the ingredients: increased money supply, all right? How do we get back to that point? You saw the chart. You know that the money supply is elevated still. Well, if we start pausing or lowering interest rates, then that may contribute to the money supply ginning up again, okay? And then that'll put us into the other ingredient automatically with the constraints and the pressures on demand. So we're there in terms of, what it takes for this perfect storm to occur. Again, the economy is so big here in America that it will take time for us to see those results. But we're seeing inflation right now. So in order to prepare for hyperinflation, what I am doing is I am trying to go ahead and satisfy long-term debt obligations, okay, or be in a position to do so. You all know that I don't advocate, for me, I don't advocate going in and just paying off a mortgage, because you get rid of a tax deduction and you also lock money in to a property. And remember, to get that money out, property might have appreciated by, a million times, but in order to get that money out, get that equity out, you need to either sell the property or get an equity loan or line of credit. And that someone else needs to make that decision, okay? Even if it's rental real estate, all right? You're getting an income off of that, but in order to unlock equity from the property, you need a second, person to authorize that, a bank usually, right? Or you can also do the reverse mortgage, but again, a bank needs to be involved in that, some sort of lending company. So I don't advocate locking that money up. I do strongly advocate, and this is again my situation, what I want to do is have the funds available to satisfy the debt should things get really, really crazy. Because at the end of the day, as far as my, primary residence, okay, I don't want to be homeless, okay? Then you add to that the fact that any rental property you own, you want to continue to collect that income to the extent possible while protecting yourself from hyperinflation. If you own it outright, you are in a position then where your cash flow looks a little better if you're not having to pay a mortgage on that property. So in other words, prepare for it. You've got to prepare for it. We've got a persistent housefly here buzzing around. You might have heard it. It might be some sort of drone from Venezuela trying to prevent me from getting this message out, because they want us in a hyperinflationary environment as well, right? So prepare for it. Once we enter a hyperinflationary environment, the choices that we have on how to maneuver economically, financially are very, very limited. So thanks to the heft, okay, and the magnitude of the U.S. economy, we're in a position where we can actually prepare for this. All right, so look, we want to talk about acquiring assets in good times. We don't know if hyperinflation is going to happen, but we want to prepare for it. Watch this video. Learn how to acquire some investment real estate with no money down. You want to talk about maximizing your cash flow? Check this out. Guys, I'll talk to you soon.